Hello, my name is Vinson Zheng, and my project is titled Detecting Sarcasm Within Tweets Using Natural Language Processing Techniques. My research mentors were Sina, Mahdipour, Sravani, and Fatemeh, Hashemi. I am a senior at San Marcos High School in Texas, and our school logo is a purple rattlesnake. My field of interest in STEM is in computer science, and my hobby is to play golf in my spare time. Sina and Fatemeh are both graduate students at Colorado State University, and they're currently involved in the Cybersecurity lab, which is managed by Professor Indrakshi Ray. Sina enjoys food and video games in his spare time, and Fatemeh enjoys outdoor camping and hiking in her spare time. Currently, they're focused on the issue of misinformation spread. So with the COVID-19 virus causing a global pandemic, many people were forced to undergo quarantine. Now, having all this extra time on their hands, they began to spend more time on the internet, especially on social media. However, even before the global pandemic began, social media platforms were already increasing in popularity, with the period of quarantine further increasing their growth. And there are currently billions of active social media users across the world. Since users have a large degree of freedom in what they post and how frequently they post, there is an excess of information on social media. And it is hard to tell who is telling the truth because it can be difficult to detect a nuance within the human language, such as sarcasm, within a text-based post, so they can oftentimes be misinterpreted. This presents a problem of misinformation and makes it very difficult for official sources such as the World Health Organization to distribute information and updates about the pandemic. Some users have become so heavily dependent on these social media platforms that they readily accept any information that is displayed with them, even if they have not confirmed whether or not it comes from a reliable source. If they were to learn about false information about the pandemic and apply it to their daily lives, it could affect others in the public. So over the summer, I learned more about the field of natural language processing, which focuses on giving computers the ability to understand text and spoken words the same as a human would. Natural language processing utilizes deep learning, which can be represented as a neural network, a piece of software which can be customized for a specific learning task. I had to learn how to use Python, a scripting language, which is commonly used within the field of natural language processing in order to modify and program software. Within Python, there are libraries which can be envisioned as sets of toolboxes for specific tasks. Transformers, which is developed by Hugging Face, and PyTorch are two libraries which are geared towards deep learning tasks in natural language processing, and they contain the tools which are necessary for creating a neural network. This project focused mainly on analyzing tweets from Twitter, and the papers that I have read throughout the summer have also focused their attention on this social media platform. Neural networks are the architecture in which deep learning occurs, and they're composed of several components. Neurons, sometimes called nodes or perceptrons, are a single unit within a neural network, and there are typically millions of them. So a neuron has some inputs represented by X1 and X2, some math occurs within the blue circle, and then an output is produced. So the math inside consists of the inputs being multiplied by a specific weight value, which is initially randomized, and then added to a bias value, which is also initially randomized. And these are known as the parameters. Then they are passed through an activation function, which bounds the output into a certain predictable range. Neural networks are trained in a training data set. And then as it is being trained, a validation data set is being used to ensure that the model is progressing in the correct direction. After a model has been trained, a testing data set is used to test the model to make sure the model has not been overtrained on the training data set. Feed-forward is whenever the values flow through the function value from X into the math in the middle and then out as the output of Y. And the outputs are never fed backwards in a feed-forward process. This diagram on the right is an example of a fully connected feed-forward network in which all of the inputs from a previous layer are fed into the node of the next layer. So the value of the loss function is how far the output of the neuron has deviated from the correct value. When optimizing the value, the partial derivative of the loss function is calculated with respect to each parameter. And this allows the parameters to be updated in order to minimize the value of the loss function. And this process is known as backpropagation. Neural networks can have many different shapes depending on their function. And this is just one example of them. So in the process of dropout, some of the nodes in the specific run of the feed-forward process, some of the nodes are ignored so that their outputs do not matter. And this prevents the model from being overfitted on the training and validation data sets. Overfitted models will not produce accurate results with the testing data set. The scheduler controls the speed at which the model moves towards optimal parameters. In other words, the rate at which the parameters are updated. So the problem statement is given a thread of tweets, determine the last tweet in the thread is sarcastic or not. So the data points in the data set that we use, the data points are tweets that reply to at least one other tweet and up to a context of 3 previous tweets. This is because sarcasm is sometimes defined in a conversation rather than in a single tweet. And here's an example of a sarcastic labeled data point with a context size of 2. So the methodology we used was based off of a previous neural network that my research mentor Sina had created. We used pre-trained transformers models, fully connected layers, and a majority voting system. Here's a diagram of the majority voting system in which the inputs are passed into 3 different models and then into the majority voting system, and then finally as an output. So the pre-trained models, we used Roberta large case and Roberta large, and then these models were previously trained on a general language understanding task. And Twitter BERT version 2 was trained on COVID-19 tweets. Because they were pre-trained, the parameters are not randomized because they have been saved from their previous train. Here's a more detailed diagram of the neural network process. So on the very left, the context, the entire data point from the context to the response is being concatenated into a single string. This string is then passed into the tokenizer of each of the different models. And the tokenizer separates the string into tokens, which is either words, emojis, or subwords, such as prefixes or suffixes. These tokens are then converted into a numerical passed into a transformer, which converts them into a numerical vector representation of size 1024. It also creates, which is represented by T1, another single vector representation of size 1024 that represents the whole sentence. This is because we want to know if the sentence is stochastic or not holistically, rather than just like a single token. And this sentence representing token is also known as CLS token, and it is passed into a fully connected fully connected layer in which they are converted from a vector size of 1024 into a vector size of 2. One for the sarcastic class and one for the non-sarcastic class. These 6 values are then passed into the final fully connected layer, which also performs a majority voting, in which the 6 values are compressed into a value size of 2. One for sarcastic class, one for non-sarcastic class. This is then passed into the softmax activation function, which converts it into a prediction between prediction value between 0 and 1. So here are the hyperparameters and configurations that we used, which produced the best results based off the hardware limitations that we had. And this is a visual representation of a scheduler in which the learning rate has been optimized over time in order to reach the lowest value of the loss function quickly. Here the results are obtained. So there are four different categories of score: the precision, recall, F1 score, and accuracy. The support is just the number of data points for each specific label. And the precision is out of how many data points for a specific label, and gives a percentage of how many the model could predict correctly. The recall, however, depends on all the predictions that the model has made of a specific label and gives a percentage of how many predictions were correct. The F1 score is a combination of the precision and recall, and the accuracy is the total number of correct precisions divided by the total number of the data points. Macro average as the 2 F1 scores and divides by the number of label types, 2 in this case. And the weighted average takes the average with consideration to the number of supports for each label, and it's the same in this case. And the confusion matrix on the bottom has first has the TN, the true negative value, which is the number of non-sarcastic labels that I was able to correctly predict as non-sarcastic. The false positive, which is the number of non-sarcastic labels incorrectly predicted as sarcastic. The false negative, which is the number of sarcastic labels incorrectly predicted as non-sarcastic. And the true positive, which is the number of sarcastic labels correctly predicted as sarcastic. Here are the references that I used. And a huge thank you to my research mentors for their guidance and patience throughout the summer, whether it was from giving me materials, debugging my code, answering questions, or looking through my presentation. Thank you for your time.